Hello, my name is Flor, and I was born in Buenos Aires, Argentina. But really early in my childhood, my family moved to Spain. I was raised in a somewhat similar environment from the one back home. Culture, language, and complexion were factors that often didn't make me any different. My origin, my background was barely mentioned, and I truly didn't feel excluded. I was like the people around me, like the people in my neighborhood, in my school. I felt represented on the shows that I watched and on the magazines I read. And this is because, even though I'm South American, I do look very European. So I did fit in, but in an external way, in a physical way. In 2016, my family moved to Hong Kong. That was a big change. I was aware of the discriminative struggles some people suffer in the US and also back in Spain. But I don't think I actually realized or got the idea of what it was like until I was a racial minority in Hong Kong. My experiences are in no way the same as what other people experience in other countries, but they still affected me in some way. I am living in an Asian country, so 92% of the population in Hong Kong is ethnically Chinese. That means that when I look around me, most of the people I see do not look like me. That obviously affected me, and I did feel excluded because I did not only felt like I didn't fit in when people would speak in another language in front of me on purpose, or when I turned on the TV and I couldn't find people that looked like me. But what affected me the most was my daily life, because I walked past advertisements that had Asian people. I turned on the TV and saw advertisements that had Asian people, but also I did not realize that there's other advertisements that show other races. Like, I realized that Hong Kong is not the big problem here, because this is an advertisement that was displayed in the MTR station between Hong Kong and Central. And it's featuring the tennis player Serena Williams, which is an African American. And that's when I realized that I shouldn't worry about myself, but I should worry about the biggest film industry in the world, which is Hollywood. It does not only lack racial representation, but also the representation of gender and the LGBT community. It is currently dominated by white, straight males. I based most of my research in two studies. The first one was UCLA's, which examined 174 films, and the other one was a USC study, which examined 1,100 films and 48,757 characters. The first thing I'm going to talk about is the LGBT community and its lack of representation. Of the top 100 films in 2017, 81 had no LGBT characters in it at all. Hollywood films failed to represent the population that identified themselves as part of the LGBT community, which was 4.5%. And this is based on a survey that was released in that same year. The representation stood at less than 1%. And it did not only lack the representation of members of the LGBT community, but members of color. As of the 31 characters that were displayed in the movies, 67.7% were white. The next big problem is the racial diversity in the Hollywood films. As in 2016, the whites took up 78.1% of the total roles in films. Well, in reality, 60.7% is the actual white population in the United States. The black race consists of, in 2016, they took up to 13.3% of the population, and the representation in films stood at 12.5%, which is obviously underrepresented. And it might seem like not as big as a problem, but when you think about it, 9.3% of the rest of the roles in films were left to other minorities, because Latinos and Asians took up to 17.8% and 5.7% of the population respectively that same year. So people tend to focus on white and black, but we have to have everybody in mind, because there's also the mixed people and also natives, and we have to widen our perspective of the Hollywood film industry. Then there's the representation of gender. Of the 100 top films in 2017, 67 had no female leads or co-leads. And their total representation in films was 31.8%, which is pretty problematic because this means that only 31.8% of the total characters had actual speaking roles in films. And there was no change during from 2007 to 2017, as the percentage had only changed, had increased 1.9%. 50.8% of the population of the United States that same year consisted of females. So they are clearly underrepresented too. When we examine the lack of representation of race, gender, and the LGBT community, we can only conclude that it comes from a sexist, racist, and homophobic behavior, and therefore can only result in the propagation of such. When we see those movies, we only see white, we only see straight, and we only see male. So we think that anything that doesn't go along those lines is a deformity or a rarity. We need to start thinking about this problem because it's domination. We see that, and this is reflected on society because racism is a cultural fact that is evidenced in different degrees, and it stands by the belief that race and the color of your skin determines your worth or value. Sexism is a social practice and a conjunction of beliefs that comes from very traditional ideologies that considers women as an inferior race. And homophobia is the prejudice against homosexuals that comes from old-fashioned social standards which only support and consider valid one's sole sexual orientation. This type of ways of thinking are also reflected on movies through stereotypes and through useless characters. Stereotypes are forced upon gender and race and the LGBT community. An example of a racial stereotype is that of a nation that cannot speak proper English and that is seen as a lowly race. An example of this is Mr. Chow from the movie The Hangover. He's a clownish Chinese gangster that speaks broken English, has a thick accent, and is seen as less masculine and inferior from the eyes of the other characters. A next stereotype that's forced upon women too is that they have to be very sexual. And this is shown as in the statistics of 2017, as it is shown that of the 100 top films, 28.4% of the characters wore some kind of sexy attire, and 25.4% had shown some type of nudity. And when you compare it to the male counterparts, you can see that there's a big difference. This over-sexualized form of a woman is represented, for example, in Mother Family. Gloria. I love this character, and I love the movie, but it is true that plots made around her body and her attire are not a rarity in the show. This type of stereotypes forced upon women hurt the perception of us, since it could make people think that it is okay to see us or joke about seeing us as objects that have the sole purpose of satisfying sexual needs and not as human individuals that have thoughts and feelings of our own. And stereotypes in general constrict our identities, and they degrade us to really non-accurate stereotypes. Diversity has to be meaningful and purposeful, and Hollywood has seemed to have forgotten about that because they think that by putting random characters of color or part of the LGBT community or random females, it would be okay. They think that by just reaching the minimum diversity quota or by trying to avoid being labeled as racist by putting these characters in, everything's gonna be fine. And that's not true, because we need to put characters that have a story, that can contribute to the plot and to the message of the movie. We need to start making Hollywood cast a varied, balanced, and equal cast, because Hollywood is one of the biggest film industries in the world. And this issue does not only matter to me, but it should also matter to you, because believe it or not, it makes an impact on us and on children, teenagers, and adults to not being able to identify themselves with people that they see on the big screens, and to be able to not feel represented is not something that people should have to go through. Such a big industry that Hollywood is should not be exclusive. It should be inclusive. Therefore, we all have to come together and bring awareness to this problem, because we have the power to do so. We are the ones who watch the movie. We are the target audience. Therefore, it is okay, it makes sense that our voices are the ones that are heard. We need to come together and talk about this and share about this and make people realize it, because a lot of people are not aware that this is a problem. And we need to use our power. You need to use your power and make a change. That's my goal for today. I wish that you would get out of here and bring awareness to this issue. Thank you.